Great. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm excited that we have so many people with us today. My name is Gabriel with my colleague Guillaume, and we're going to be presenting you a technical webinar on how about the hand of Basic Auth in Microsoft 365. So, as you may know, we're pretty much a month away from the disable Basic Auth to be disabled by Microsoft. We thought it would be a great idea to just talk to you and explain to you what is Basic Auth, different way to disable it, and also know if you have it on your tenants. So just a quick comment before we get started. The webinar was originally planned for 30 minutes, but we got some feedback from you folks, and we decided to extend it to 45 minutes. However, if you can make it to the end, the webinar will be available for rewatching to you without any problem. So let's get started. This webinar is presented to you by First Product. So First Product is our own IP at Sherweb. It's a great way to have an effortless 24/7 monitoring and securing of Microsoft 365. So really excited that we're able to talk to you how to disable webinar and being presented by First Product. Cool. So let me just go through the agenda of the call. So we're going to be covering what is Basic Auth, how to know if you're still using it, how to disable it. We also have a great section about a security reality check where we understand that life kind of gets in the way, and we're showing you some different scenarios and workaround. And we're going to be finishing with a Q&A. So without further ado, take it away, Guillaume.
All right. Thank you very much, Gabriel. Quick word on if you have questions, there's a box directly in the software that we're using. So please do not hesitate to put in any question that you may have. We'll be trying to answer them either as we go, as we get to the end. As I'm sure you understand, there's a million different sort of variation on different setups and everything. So we may not have the answer to everything. Well, we'll try our hardest to answer right now. And if we don't have an answer for you, we'll go to our experts internally and get you the answer a little bit later. Thank you, everybody, for being here. One thing that I'd like to mention as I start is I forgot that GoToWebinar doesn't do the fuzzy background effect. So I probably should have cleaned up my office a little bit. But as you can see, I really do like computers. But don't judge me too harshly. We'll try to focus on the content and forget that it is a mess in my lovely basement. Okay, let's get going. So what is Basic Auth? So why are we here today, and what is this all about is a great question. So Basic Auth is not a thing. So that's maybe the first thing, is that Basic Auth doesn't exist. Basic Auth is a collection of authentication protocols that were and are still offered in Microsoft 365, but that were offered way before that in Exchange itself, like Microsoft Exchange, the email server. They were thought, like they've been around for, I don't have the exact date, probably should have the exact date, but like we're getting close to 30 years now, really, because 92, yeah, it's a 95. So 25 years they've been around, really. And as you might imagine, like most things in IT that are 25-year-old have not aged all that well, really. The idea is the protocol that are included in Basic, like as Microsoft refers to them, is NTLM, Kerberos, and VPN access. And when they say modern, it's a little bit of the same thing. It's not a thing. So modern authentication is really a collection of protocols that have been created more recently and that fit better with today's reality. And they include WSFed and SAML at first, and more recently even OAuth v2 and OpenID Connect. So I think a good question or a good place to start is what is so bad about Basic Auth? Like, why is it such a problem? I mean, it's been used for many, many years. Like, why all of a sudden, like, make such a big deal about it? So the first things first is it's not all of a sudden. So they've been saying like use the more modern protocols, like they've been saying that for quite a while. It has just come to a point where the vast majority of break into email boxes of Microsoft 365 are through these legacy protocols. So the first thing is it's not, all right. Over the years, many vulnerabilities have been found on those different protocols. And it's easy to sort of blame the protocols and all that. But I mean, anything that's been around for a very long time will have been sort of be found to have some security flaws. The other thing is anything that's not used in the context that it was designed for will also generally have a hard time. And that's really what has happened here is the basic auth protocols were not designed with the internet in mind. The credentials are generally transferred, like Basic Auth itself, the credentials are transferred in plain text unless it's done over HTTPS. So already, like you can see that we're off to a very bad start. There is also not a central authority for the access. It's also very chatty, a lot of communication on the network when really you really don't want that for your authenticity or authentication. And also they're often directly into the software solution, where a modern design is really to have an identity provider, an identity broker, and then you have your software behind it. So in this case, like the identity control is in the software. So anytime you want to evolve that security or change something, or there's a flaw that is found, you have to go fix the software itself. When really in modern design, you have something that just does your identity specifically and your authentication. And then if you want to change a method, add MFA to it, all those things, like it is done in that particular thing. There's more technical thing, like it is not claim based, things like that. But really, the idea is generally stay away. I think a good way to sort of see it, but I'll go kind of quickly here, is Basic Auth. Basically, once you have access to everything. Like it's like giving somebody the key to your home. And when we're talking about modern auth, it's more like our hotel function. So once you make a reservation, they'll give you a key. That key is only good for your room and only for a limited amount of time. So you have access to only what you're supposed to have access to for the time that you're supposed to have access to it. So that's really the difference on a sort of philosophical level. But really, the idea is modern concept like zero trust architecture are really hard to implement with anything resembling Basic Auth. Like you really need the functionality of modern auth to be able to do that. So one of the question is, why is it still around as well? So the reason is simple, is because there's way more legacy software that you think there is, legacy devices as well. They're still relying on that protocol, and they use Exchange as a mean of communication. Think about just the number of software that has been created that works in a Windows environment or Microsoft ecosystem and relies on some form of communication to a Exchange server, an email server. At first, we can blame a little bit Microsoft for not being drastic enough and saying like stop using Basic Auth and everything. But I think that just doesn't hold true anymore. Like right now, they've really done everything that they need to do to make sure that people are switching. So the thing that I haven't mentioned, and you probably know from the description of the webinar and all that, is that this is going to change. So Microsoft, what they've done so far is they've already the things that they've already disabled Basic Auth by default on all new tenants of Microsoft 365. More recently, they've disabled it for tenants that they saw where Basic Auth wasn't being used. So they looked at your login and a bunch of logins, and if it wasn't being used, they turned it off. And on October 1st, it's the end. So in theory, or how it's presented by Microsoft, is everybody gets Basic Auth turned off. It doesn't exist anymore. We'll talk about it in a little bit, like what can you do if you absolutely positively need it, but it's going to be quite an issue. Let me just turn that off so I don't get bothered. There you go. Again, if you have any questions about anything, do put them in the box for questions. We appreciate them. I know it's a big topic. There's a lot of things to cover. Okay.
Right. So now that we are on the same page about what is Basic Auth, we're going to tackle how to know if you're still using it.
Yes, thank you. We want to make this webinar as practical as possible. We're going to go through a lot of things like fairly quickly. But really, we wanted to make sure that we included like a fair amount of practical knowledge and sort of how to deal with it. And the very first thing that you may be asking yourself is, so you're saying all this, but I have no idea if I'm using it or not using it. And that's a very legitimate question. So there are at least 4 different ways. We would generally recommend the last few that we're going to state, but let's start from the beginning. Well, actually, let's get to the first one. So the first one is the good old visual inspection. So as you log into Microsoft 365, specifically when we're talking about Exchange, or Outlook, rather, when you're using your mail client, I'd rather say, if you see this first box on the left, that's Basic Auth. If you see on the right this web page-like dialog, that's modern authentication. So very, very easy way for a single person to know and to see what they're using is this. Again, if we're talking about checking few users, like not a lot, if you go into Outlook and you check your, you right-click the Outlook icon in the system tray, you will get this dialog here if you check the connection status. And you will have a column called auth n. And if it says bearer, it means that you're using modern authentication. If it says clear, it means your communication is in clear, and while your authentication it was passed in clear, and you're using basic authentication. Most of you are MSPs. I know you're not going to check each individual one by one what they're using. So if you want to do it much more efficiently, you can check the message center in Microsoft 365. Since a little bit ago, since the end of 2021, to be more precise, Microsoft started adding posts here that summarize your usage of basic authentication. So it'll give you how many unique user and all that. It's an interesting place to check it. Maybe not still the most efficient because it doesn't necessarily tell you exactly who is on Basic Auth. Honestly, since Basic Auth is generally a tenant level configuration, like you prevent everybody from using it, if you get any notification at all that you have people using it, then it's already concerned enough and you should probably deal with it. To me, the 2 real way to check is in Azure AD. So if you access Azure AD, like Azure Active Directory, in the control panel of Microsoft 365, from the control panel of Microsoft 365 in the control panels, or the admin centers, they're called actually. You can go into the sign-in, you can see it here. You could go into the sign-in section of activity and see all the sign-ins. This is available regardless of what license you're using. But if you have one of the more standard licenses, you will get 7 days of sign-ins here only. But honestly, most business, if there hasn't been any basic authentication in the last 7 days, probably that there aren't any at all. Maybe you want to check a few 7 days increments. And then the more pleasant way to check it, I would say, the most reliable, most accessible, is to basically go to the risky sign-in reports. So if you go in security and then you go in risky sign-ins, you will see the risky sign-ins, which basic auths are now considered to be risky sign-ins. The challenge here, it's the most efficient way. You can see them all, they're all there. The problem with risky sign-in is you need Azure AD Premium Plan 1. Just a little reminder what this is part of if you didn't know. But yeah, leave it to Microsoft to sometime block off some of their nicer features. There are a few ways that you could export the logs if you have a lot. So if you want to get fancy, quote unquote, you could go through the Graph APIs, for example, make a few a backend call and get those lists. You have the ability to do that. You can send them to some of the Azure storage, the different things that they have, the event hubs and everything. Especially if you have a lot of customer, this could be an avenue that's worth exploring. And then you can do direct download from web browser. So how do you disable it? So another part of our practical presentation is that's fine. Whether you have it or not, like you may want to disable it prior to October 1st even. You can do it. The easiest way to do it, I would say, is to turn on security default, which is actually now a requirement for Microsoft for their CSP partner account. So on your own account, this should definitely be turned on. Your clients, your mileage may vary, but it might work checking. So if you go again into Azure AD in the properties, you can see the security defaults right here. Manage security defaults, manage security defaults, enable security defaults. The thing to note is that's now turned on by default for new tenants. Microsoft changed that over the last year. Very good thing. I appreciate that very much. That really helps. But I would assume that most of you have tenants that are more than a year old, so it might be worth having a look at that particular setting. Another way is to use Exchange client access rules. They're a combination actually of access rules and authentication policies, but basically using PowerShell, which we can see here, PowerShell, you can get a list of client access rule and then block it. So you can see allow basic, like that's a lot of allow basic auth actually for a bunch of different things and protocols and everything. At the end of the day, they should all be turned off. Not the most user-friendly if you're more of a UI type of person, definitely not the most fun to actually put into place. I would recommend one of the other choice personally, especially since client access rules, they're a little bit deeper into Exchange. So those two. More modern way, not quite as flexible, which anyway, is conditional access policies. So if you have Azure AD Premium or a business, well, through Business Premium or through some of the other plans, you can create rules. And I know the screenshots are a little bit of an eye chart, but you can create rules that apply only to people that are trying to connect through legacy authentication clients. You can see there, bottom right, a couple of check marks. What you would do is basically, if they meet this criteria that they're using legacy authentication, then deny the access, and that would block Basic Auth, basically. It is also through this mechanism that you could create some exceptions, and we'll get to that in a minute. Nobody likes exception, especially security people, but at the end of the day, like the practical aspects of life are more important than the theory. All right, one last way to do it, disabling Basic Auth, is you can now do it through Office Protect. So we mentioned that the webinar was brought to you by Office Protect. There is now a setting where you can control Basic Auth for your, actually you can control security defaults for your tenants through Office Protect. So this gives you the ability to turn it on in a matter of click for all of your tenants. Quick word about Office Protect, because you may not be aware of it. This is a presentation about Microsoft 365, and we'll get back to Microsoft 365 in just a moment. But Office Protect is a software as a service that was created 100% by Sherweb for our MSP partners and clients. And basically what it does is it's the absolute easiest, simplest way to get a good baseline security and monitoring in place for Microsoft 365. What it will do is it will help you to configure best practice security settings, including something like security default, other things like a number of configuration, including email and for Active Directory and all that stuff. And it will monitor Microsoft 365 and generate events if anything suspicious is happening. Like, for example, somebody logs into your client from Tennessee, but they log in from Afghanistan. So that might be suspicious. It will trigger, it will let you know, things like that. It is easy to put into place. It is easy to manage and run. That was always the idea with Office Protect. We offer it into 2 versions. One version where you get the alerts and you deal with them and your client and everything. They're very easy to understand. There's really, most MSPs or have the capabilities to do that. But let's say you're not 24/7, or you want to offer a little bit more coverage, or you're rather the time of your tech people, which are very hard to hire, especially these days. I think everybody will agree, to be spent on something a little bit more fun and interesting. Then you can use our team to receive the alerts, do the triage, the analysis, to provide you with all the information, and then you own the intervention still with your client. So the idea is very simple. Office Protect will configure Microsoft 365 as good as possible, and then we'll monitor it. And then we have a version where you get the alerts, and we have a version where our security operations center gets the alerts. Okay.
Go ahead.
So one more practical aspect. You went and checked. You have clients that are using Basic Auth, and you think that's going to be a problem because it's not that easy to get them off. It's easy for Microsoft and myself to say just switch to something else. It's not that easy. So let's go through a few of the scenarios where this is a bit of a challenge. And honestly, I put them in order of, easiest to deal with to hardest to deal with. So the 4 that I could identify, and honestly, I'd love if you can have, like, if you have other scenarios, put them into the comment box, the question box. I'd love to see what else is out there. So easiest, also using modern tools, but configured on Basic Auth. That's one. Using old tools, and they're definitely configured on Basic Auth because that's the only thing that they support. Or you have first-party software that your clients have created, or even yourself, but let's say your clients have created and they're using legacy protocols. And then first-party meaning they've created them themselves, like they've coded them. And then the last one is third-party software hardware that's reliant on Basic Auth. So you bought a piece of software or a piece of hardware, and that piece of software hardware is reliant on Basic Auth to do its authorization into Exchange. And by the way, if you're wondering, like, how do I see this? Well, again, like, I'll refer back to check the risky sign-ins, check all the sign-ins, and you'll see it pretty quickly. Okay, so you're using modern tools, but they're not configured on Basic Auth, or they are configured on Basic Auth, rather, sorry. Easy peasy, simply follow the instruction to transfer the user to a modern authentication method. So that's the easy part. Talk to your client, let them know, got to change, got to get off this, time to do it. But there's like 2 little things to keep in mind. So even if you transfer them to modern auth, I would take the time to disable Basic Auth, not just leave it open, because you may point their software to the modern authentication protocols, but if you don't close the barn door, you still have a problem. The other thing to keep in mind is that if on modern authentication MFA is turned on, by switching them from one to the other, you're going to now point them to MFA. So if that's the case, not a problem. It's actually a great thing. You definitely want your clients to be using MFA. But having said that, are they ready? Do they know how to use it? So I don't want to take a too long of a detour on this, but so many problems that have arisen from the implementation of MFA have really, really been around communication and change management. So you would, like, we're tech people. To us, you tell us, like, hey, you're going to get MFA to Microsoft 365. You go, great. I'll set it up. I'll get the little authenticator app. It'll be great. But we kind of tend to forget that most people are not that technically inclined. Most people are a little bit adverse to change. So you got to make sure that you communicate this and you let them know how to do it and everything like that. So we have a whole ton of other material around MFA. This isn't the presentation for it, but I just want to make sure that you're not assuming that people just know how to deal with MFA. I've talked to many a partner, and I won't name names, that basically gave up on MFA for some clients because it was just too much of a pain in the buttocks to implement it, if you pardon my French. Okay, let's get to the next one. So people are using legacy version of Windows, Outlook, or other email clients. Well, there's no million way around it. It's time to upgrade. You probably have tried to upgrade those clients in the past. This is a case that we see so often with our MSPs is they're like, well, I've tried. They don't want to. You have to do it. Like you have to make it a full project. You have to track it and everything and expose it to management and all of that. But the thing that I see, trying to see a little bit of a silver lining here, or a positive aspect, is it's a great opportunity to leverage a fixed deadline that is set by somebody else. So if your situations are anything like mine, when you say something, people just go, yeah, all right, whatever, and then they don't do it. This is an opportunity to say Microsoft is turning it off. We don't have a choice. We have to get off. It's time to upgrade. Like you can blame somebody else for the urgency, and I think honestly that's only fair. Like it's the truth. You're not BSing anybody. Like that's the case. So this is a great opportunity to finally get some of those old, like the people that didn't want to move, like use this as a clear deadline. Like we got to get on this. We got a month to get to this. Even if it takes 2 months, like we still have to do it. Since I like to argue with myself, which a webinar definitely gives me the opportunity to do so, try and resist the urge to attach everything to this project. So finally you got them moving. They'll get off Windows XP, or they'll change that old like industrial thing to the new version. Don't try to like, oh, we should redo your 10 base T network, or we should change all those firewalls at the same time. Like you finally got an in to change specifically things to modernize them. It might not be a good idea to attach everything else because it will kill your timeline, and you may get a sort of an overall no when really you would have gotten a yes to this specific project. I'm kind of curious, like, am I too out of touch? Am I dreaming? Do you guys still have clients that just don't want to move, even though you've told them like a million times? You've given them like a fair price on an upgrade. Maybe you even did them like you were like, hey, I'll do it at cost if it gets you off XP or something like that. Like, does that still exist today amongst your clients, or that's gone? I'd love to hear from you guys, and then I'll update my speech. Okay, so now we get to the trickier ones. They might not apply to as many people, so I'll go a little bit quicker. But first-party software reliant on legacy protocols. So you've built software, it uses Exchange for communication, and it uses a legacy authentication protocol. Good news, bad news on that one. Good news is Microsoft has pretty extensive documentation on how to do the change from one to the other. Other good news is you don't have to change the communication protocol. You just have to change the authentication protocol, which is an important distinction and may make the upgrade much simpler. But a little bit of bad news as well is that if you haven't started, a month to make that change is a pretty tight deadline. Anybody that has done anything with any developer knows that the estimate is 2 weeks and the actual time is 2 months. It's time to get started. Like we're up against it in this particular case. When it comes to backend, maybe a little thing, again, doesn't apply to everybody, but I'd love to try to be useful here. If you have an application that's backend, like you don't have a front end, like it's not a form that you fill or something like that, how do you deal with multi-factor authentication? So if the application is built to mimic a user, you're going to have a big problem if multi-factor authentication is turned on and forced. The backend application cannot do it. There are ways around it, like service principal accounts and things like that, but it's something to keep in mind. You may have to put conditional access policies to remove MFA from the application, things like that. And then the last one, which would be actually very common, is your clients are still using third-party software or hardware that is reliant on basic authentication. There's a pretty big distinction here whether the software or hardware is out of support. So if it's still supported, great news. There should already be a new version that is available that uses the new protocols or authentication. And if there isn't, there really should be. If it's a small company that you're dealing with or something like that, maybe talk to them and see what their plan is about that. But they really, like, they're on the hook for providing you the solution. Because if they don't, you're stuck. And honestly, like, why wouldn't they? Because if they don't, you're probably going to switch to another more modern software. Same thing as with the first explanation is make sure Basic Auth is disabled. Even if you switch the software, like, don't leave Basic Auth on because it doesn't help, although Microsoft will turn it off soon. And then same thing, if there's MFA, like when you make the switch, like, be careful with that. So what about if it's out of support? So that's it gets a little bit less fun here. So you like, and again, put it in the Q&A if you guys don't mind. Tell me if this happens or doesn't happen or what. You have a client, they use some piece of hardware that was created in 1997, and there is no new one being made, and that's that. But it's using Basic Auth. So you still migrated the mailbox that it calls to Microsoft 365, and now you're sort of between a rock and a hard place because can't do Basic Auth, can't change the piece of hardware, sort of can't do anything. I didn't want to leave you with like your stock can't do anything. That doesn't seem like a very useful webinar. So here's a few suggestions, and some of them Microsoft may be throwing rocks at me for just even mentioning them. But I love reality. I love MSP partners because they have to deal with reality. So let's get into reality. Ideally, like, all right, so option number one is the obvious one. Stop using whatever software, hardware you were using and use some new product that actually does security correctly. It sounds trivial, but I mean, at some point you got to bite the bullet because the difference in cost between the change project, like going to some other platform or software or hardware, compared to having a ransomware event or having all your trade secret or client list stolen, like, there is no good answer there of staying on something that is insecure. Option two, that's the bad news. There used to be a path to ask an exception from Microsoft 365. Officially, it's dead. So they've said officially, like, there is no more exception. It doesn't exist. Can't ask for an exception. I'm going to be the skeptic and say that, well, I would still ask my rep if you're big enough or something. If you have a really good reason, maybe they can still do it. But officially, like, I haven't heard anything different. Like, officially, the word is no more exceptions. So I wouldn't count on it. That's why we scratched it out here. But I'm curious. I'm still curious. I'm a curious person. All right. Option number three, which is probably the one that most people would explore, which I really hate. Like, I don't like that option, but you need a solution. Is move to a platform for that particular email that gives you the ability to retain basic authentication. So if you move it back to Exchange on premise or your own server or something, in theory, you could still have basic auth and you can have it for a long time. I would recommend combining that with very, very stringent security measure. So some IP security, like only the IP. Let's say it's a hardware you can't change. So whatever its IP address, like, I would make it so it's the only thing that can basic auth into this server, or it's the only thing that can access the server. Even like you make it behind the firewall, and the only thing that can access it is the Internet of Thing thing or the industrial connected thing. So it's a possibility. It exists. So I would, like, if I was desperate, that's where I would go. But honestly, like, this is an order of I hope you can do this to last resort type of thing. This is definitely down in the last resort section. But like I said, I like reality. Sometimes you need one of those solutions to just keep moving forward. All right. So a little bit of homework for before October 1st. I'm going to pass it back to Gabriel.
Yeah, I'm getting told that my audio is a bit choppy. So I'll cover that with data, but let me know if it's still
Well,
okay.
Is mine choppy or is it just yours?
It's just mine, like since the beginning.
Okay. Well, I could keep going. I can talk forever.
Yeah, cool.
So very simple, 3 things to do for now, and far from me to tell you what to do. You probably have done a lot of this, but if you haven't, like, it's always good to put it there. Review the list of sign-in from your client organization, definitely. Identify which of the scenarios that we were talking about it falls under, because it makes such a big difference to how you're gonna sort of react to it and take action. And then discuss, plan, and execute. I mean, like you guys are MSP, so you know about that more than I do. Got to put it into place, got to put it into writing, got to make it official, get the money you need to get to do it. Because you, and I'm sure you've all done it, dealing with a security issue like a break-in or hijacking of accounts, things like that, is so much worse than dealing with a well-planned upgrade project. So let's make sure we have a upgrade project instead of security issues. You know what I mean? I would say that you can combine things here, where if you have a plan, let's say they have 1,000 XP workstation, like, God, knock on wood, I hope not, but let's say, and you're like, well, we have a plan, but it's going to take a year or it's going to take 6 months. What do we do? Well, I think it's a combination of things. Like, you find a solution to keep everybody working in the meantime, and you execute it, and you have a clear view on the end and when you can get rid of that and go back to a more modern way of operating. I think that's sort of the only way to go, in a sense of what else would you do? Like, Microsoft can put whatever they want on anything, but that doesn't dictate the readiness of your clients or their eagerness to do it like quickly. So, but I think this has to be like documented and shared and clear. And I think we'll have a little bit of an opportunity here where the partners that are all like no basic auth anywhere, like all of our clients are clean, we'll have a little bit of a selling point. Like, oh yeah, we've done it, we know how to do it, all of our clients are clean. I think that's going to be a good selling point for everybody that has it. All right, let's do a little bit of a Q&A. If there's anything that came up, anything you want to point out or that I missed, because I'm sure I missed a few things even that were already in my notes. Oh yeah, I have a good one here. So Jason says, I have heard that SMTP auth will still allow basic auth for legacy device like printer. Is this true? So that is true. So Microsoft will disable it automatically for everything except SMTP auth. So if that's specific, and I had it in my note to mention it, so I'm glad somebody asked the I'm asked somebody asked a question. Sorry, because yes, that is correct. You will still have access to SMTP auth specifically. So if you want to throw that into your project, like when you check your risky sign-ins, if they're all SMTP auth, in theory, you will not suffer the wrath of Microsoft, but you're still your security is still exposed. So make sure you have, if you're still using it and you're like, we're going to keep using it, our printers are on this, can't do anything, make sure you have other security mechanism around it. Like, make sure it's obviously over SSL. I would try to do IP security to block everybody out, like everybody else out from Basic Auth, and then leave just the printer to be able to access through a Basic Auth client, things like that. Any, Gabriel, do you have any questions that you saw that you thought were particularly relevant?
There was one about, can you check the authentication type in Outlook?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
It's from Carmine. Can you check the authentication type in Outlook?
Can you check the authentication type in Outlook? Yes. So that's one of the methods that we pointed out. So in Outlook, if you right-click the system tray icon and you go connection status, if it says in the auth column, if it says bearer, it means you're on a modern one. If it says plain, it means you're on a basic auth. You can also see it through the visual of the box that pops up, like when you're authenticating. So will this presentation be available for rebroadcast? Yes, absolutely. You'll be able to look at it on our YouTube channel, I believe. So somebody pointed out the SMTP auth. That is correct. Yeah, so a number of people were asking about the SMTP auth. I should have caught that. It was in my notes. Sorry if I scared the people that were assuming that it would be okay. It will be okay. Will administration retain the ability to re-enable these protocols? So in theory, no. That's the scary part. On an account per account basis, like, could you enable it like that? Microsoft says no. Microsoft says it's gone, no exception. If that is a problem, and I've poked our reps and everything, and that's the answer we get. No, it's gone, no more, except SMTP auth. But I would validate that with your rep. I would check into it, like I would make sure. But that's the information that we were given. That's the information that is available publicly. Few people seem to be in agreement that change is hard. MFA is hard. People are changing, though. Yeah, I agree. I think we've seen. I think we've seen the evolution, really, like, of people when it comes to that. It used to be like, I would say, not so long ago, 90% of people didn't have it, MFA. Now I would say the majority of our clients are on it, which is great. It's great. I mean, it's so good, and so many people are on it that the hackers have now found ways around MFA. And that's how you know that something is working, is the hackers are now super interested in it and will find ways around it. So if people thought, like, I'm on MFA now, I'm done, security's done, bad news. Bad news for you. But it's still much better to have it than to not have it. A lot better. There's a question about how to specifically get to risky sign-ins. I try not to jump through my slides on a presentation because it's kind of jarring. If you go back to the slide, like in the recorded, you'll see it. It's really simple. So if you're in a Microsoft portal, you go to the admin centers, and there's one called Active Directory. You go into that one. You'll have security, and in security, you'll have reports, and in reports, you'll have risky sign-ins. I may have one of those steps wrong, but I don't think so. I think that's exactly correct. Otherwise, you can literally look it up, like Azure Risky Sign-ins or Active Directory Risky Sign-ins, and it will take you directly to it. If you don't have it, if you're like, I don't have that, it's because you don't have the correct license from Microsoft 365. Lots of one user only prawns for phone number. Yeah, we have a lot of questions. That's great. Hey, thanks guys for being here. A couple of things. So I'll move away from the Q&A. If you haven't heard the answer to your question, don't worry. Like, we keep all of these and we answer everybody, just don't have the time to do it live for everybody. So I want to mention a couple of small things before we go. Office Protect. If you're concerned about the security of Microsoft 365, which I would assume the people that are here today are concerned about the security of Microsoft 365, give Office Protect a look. You probably already have access to it through your licenses of Microsoft 365 at Sherweb. If you don't, talk to your rep. If you want to get on the Not for Resale partner program, where you can get access to Office Protect for free, talk to your rep. We'll be there. If you don't have a rep, you can call our service or email partners at sherweb.com. Also, if you can see at the bottom, like, our portfolio for security and compliance product has expanded dramatically, and we're doing much better than we were just a couple of years ago. So we have, I think the most recent thing that we've had is Trend Micro endpoint protection, or Drops. There's a number of them. Like that, this is so great. I'm so happy we have all those products now. So if there's anything that we can help you with, just make sure you reach out to us. We're there for you. There's so much more that we can do than just sell you licenses. So do talk to us, and please start with Office Protect, and we'll see you around. Like we said, questions will be answered directly for the people that haven't been answered, and then this will be sent as a direct link for the recorded version in the next, usually 48 hours, sometimes 24. Thank you very much for your time, everybody, and have a fantastic day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.